started this madness again. So
no, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, we absolutely really would. We had several questions to ask you, and we really do appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we had William Bell got on probably about 6 months ago.
I know William.
Yeah, we spoke with him on his views, and then kind of we've all been just looking into scripture and saw some of your stuff as well. So just like to see what your take is. I know you've been making some videos lately, so whatever you could share with us would be great.
Well, I mean, that whole thing started, I was down in Florida, and a lot of personal things just going on. I went through a really horrible divorce, 4 years ago, and my dad, he was falling ill. So basically, my sister and my mom were saying, if you can come up here, and your dad, he wants you up here. I said, well, okay, I need to get out of the state anyway. So, I go up there to Indiana and everything, and basically just living a pretty normal churchgoer, quiet life. I'm not really doing anything. But then, November of 2016, someone sent me the video of Don that he was doing this thing on 1 Corinthians 15, and he was using this is the original book.
Yeah.
Exegetical Essays on the Right. This was the one that Virgil Viduva and Truth Voice published back in 2002 or somewhere, and he was using that book, and I repudiated that book. Of course, I've left Full Preterism. American Vision published my book. Why I left Full Preterism. Joel McDermott came up with that title. That wasn't my title. He just said, well, I'll just call it Why I Left Full Preterism. All right, whatever. They published it. But, I noticed Don Newton, and he's saying, this is a must-read book. If you want to understand 1 Corinthians 15, you got to read Sam Troth's book. Well, of course, he's saying that because J. Don Publishing, he publishes it. So and I gave him the rights when I was just leaving. Don and I we were like this, and the first publication had ran out, and Virgil didn't want to publish it anymore because of financial reasons. And I said, oh, but Don was after me to get it. He wanted that book, and I thought, well, Don, take it. It's yours, and so Don revamped it, put a new cover on it, wrote the foreword, and kind of made it his own. And I think like 6 months later, the dominoes were starting to work, and Don continued to publish it. But I didn't hear, but like I said, there was a lot of things. This was years ago, so there was a lot of things going on in my personal life where I just kind of faded out. And then coming up here to Newcastle to be with my dad, may he rest in peace. He passed away in December. And I was very close to my dad. And that's why I wear the golf. This is his hat, by the way. So he was an avid golfer. That's why I golf today, is because of that. But so that was November, and then Dad passed away in December. And so all of this resurrection of the dead, and of course I'm ministering to my dad, who's he's dying right in front of me, and it just everything dovetailed. And I thought, I got to respond to this, because Don, who I was personal with for many years on the speaking tours that we were doing, was still selling this book, and I was a little offended by it. I was like, he knows I don't believe in this anymore, but yet he's touting me which makes me look like, I guess the offense would be if you once was a white supremacist and you learned that white supremacy is stupid, but you wrote a book about it, but now you're not a white supremacist, but yet the white supremacist groups are still publishing your book. You'd want your name off that. Does that make any sense? Yeah. So that's how I was approaching it. I was like, I got to respond to this stuff. I can't have this. Anyway, that's how that. And I had this stuff because Jason Bradfield gave me he built me a wonderful computer, and I had this thing on here to make videos. And so I went and bought a camera, and so, and you can see in the videos, I start first like this. I'm not wearing it. And then it just kind of evolves into this thing, because when Dad passed away, I ministered there, and I'm an old liturgist. You know, I love liturgy. I love the history of liturgy. I've always have been involved in high church kind of stuff, just the symbolism of it. I get it. I get it. I realize everybody doesn't get it, and I don't force it on anybody, but I get it and I like it. And so it just kind of, from that, there was I found, my dad had this private stash because he was a bit of a poet, and he would write songs, and we'd play guitar, and he would come out with these songs. And I found this box of his old stash of songs and lyrics and poems that he had written and stuff. And he had in there my ordination ceremony and pictures, and he had written a thing on it. It was his most happiest moment when I was ordained as a pastor and all of that. So with his passing, it was like a whole second wind. I'm sure it's all very subjective, spirituality on my part, but I felt like that. Here it comes again. And then other doors started opening in ministry here. Like I was saying with somatics, there's a ministry here that a door opened up to where I can, start talking. And so just things just start falling in place. And I didn't think anything would come out of these videos, to tell you the truth, but then the response has been pretty overwhelming. I mean, like, okay, well, I just don't like my name associated with Don Preston other than I used to be with Don Preston. I mean, I respect Don Preston as the man. Don's an incredibly nice guy. We were friends. We still are friends on Facebook, but I think he's really went off the reservation on a lot of, that's what caused I was seeing that go in certain directions. Like I didn't come into this full preterism with that thinking in the first place. And when I started seeing that it was pushing that envelope, I got uncomfortable. So I left.
We have noticed, I've noticed particularly that, Don Preston, he seems like out of balance, that he's always talking about full preterism. He never talks about any of the other aspects of Christianity. And
Right.
That's my flags, but at the same time, several of us here are actually full preterists, that we just could not fight the scripture. I mean, we looked at it, we were honestly looking at it, and every one of us that did that resisted it at first. We absolutely resisted it. And then, like for me, when William Bell came on, and I was completely resistant to him, and even though I know that a lot of times when you know the scripture a lot, you do this scriptural shorthand where you'll just start off the book, the chapter and the verse, and then we go on. But I'm always one that I actually want to go to the scripture. So I stopped him. And I like, no, let's actually go there. And we went there, and I actually wrote down all these points. And then after about 2 weeks, I'm realizing that I'm actually the one that's trying to twist and contort scripture to do what I thought was the correct thing. But then what I believed that it was actually going along with what church history would be, because what I see the argument is, well, how can everyone have gotten it wrong so far in the past? And then now we're getting it right. But at the same time, I'm actually praying, Lord, give me revelation so that I can prove my brothers wrong. And then I realized that is not the type of prayer to have. And so I started to be a little bit more open to it, and then I accepted it. And I would imagine that the other people here have gone through the same thing. So I just can't, it just seems like all the arguments for full preterism, when you base it on sola scriptura alone, like I think what you had mentioned when you were in Jerry Johnson's radio broadcast, you said, well, the creeds were heretics, but according to sola scriptura, we're not. And so that's really where we're kind of at right now. And but we do have futurists that come on, and we do have partial preterists that come on as well. And there are several of us.
Right.
I know that you had mentioned before that Calvinism and full preterism just cannot coincide together. But there are several of us that believe in the five solas. We believe in tulip. We believe that God alone is sovereign. And we would consider ourselves Calvinists, although we would not hold to the Westminster Confession of Faith. So in that regard, you're quasi-Calvinist, I suppose, that you could say, or? I don't know.
Does anyone else have anything to say, or is that?
I mean,
Pretty much it.
Yeah, I mean,
well, I mean, I got a question for you if you want to answer to that one after he's done, or however
yeah,
you want
sure.
to take it.
You know, keeping in mind with what was just said too, so which was eloquent.
Right.
And
Yeah, I was. When did you first kind of get into preterism then, Sam? Like full preterism?
well, yeah, I mean, speaking to that, I had my a Bachelor of Theology already under my belt. It was kind of a, you know, I mean, it's very clear to me, you know, the procession of it in my junior year, there at Liberty College. A professor came on board, and he was Reformed, but he was reading a lot of you know, Noam Chomsky and Habermas and linguistic theory, because he was a Wycliffe Bible translator, and Norman Pike, the Summer Institute of Linguistics there in Texas, they were doing a great work that even secular linguistic theorists acknowledged Norman Pike, even though he's a fundamentalist Christian. But nonetheless, they acknowledge that his theory of linguistics is, you know, I mean, basically these Wycliffe Bible translators go into these indigenous tribes that have no written language, and they sound out. So much theory is involved there. So he got me involved in all that, kind of opened up a door to, you know, philosophy and all of this other stuff, and really encouraged. But he was also Reformed. So he was reading Rushdoony and Gordon Clark and Van Til. So naturally I start reading, you know, this stuff, and I come across, you know, James Jordan and Gary North and Dr. Kenneth Gentry and David Chilton. And I read Paradise Restored. This is when that book had just come out. And I grew up in a dispensationalist Foursquare Gospel church as a child, and then in that in the late 70s, 80s was the charismatic movement was coming through. And so now I'm in Bible college. I had never heard of John Calvin. We didn't talk about church history. We talked about the gifts of the Spirit and what's God telling you today. You know, that's what we talked about. So hearing all this theology and stuff, you know, it just opened up a whole thing to me. And here comes, you know, David Chilton. And I don't know, I just read that book, Paradise Restored, and I read it again. And then I read it again. And then I called California and I looked up David Chilton. I had to call it, and we talked. And I said, this book that you've written, you know, I've never heard anything like this. But it was church history. You know, Chilton, as you know, probably it was what you'd call, I guess, a partial preterist. So that started that. And then Chilton, we got his book hot off the press, Days of Vengeance. That was his commentary on Revelation, written from a preterist perspective. And, you know, James Jordan, Kenneth Gentry, you know, all these guys. And Gentry was at Whitfield Theological Seminary, where I finished all of my degree work up there, and he did Before Jerusalem Fell. So all of this dovetailed, but Chilton had a footnote in his book about this guy named Max King. And I found the book and I bought it. This huge book, you know, 900-page Crossing the Parousia of Christ, this huge book on 1 Corinthians 15. And I read that, and then I called Max King. And I said, you know, this is like 1991, 92, somewhere around there. So I called Max King and I said, this, you know, that you're going against the whole grain of, but yet the argument sounded so good. You know, it's like, you know, well, you know, touching on that, I came from a dispensationalist background. So for me, last days carried a meaning to it. It wasn't the span of church history. Last days was a short period of time. There were other phrases that carried the, you know, covenant of Israel, and Israel is an ethnic identity and all of that other stuff carried. So when I heard full preterism, a lot of the dispensation, I could carry that right on into full preterism because it's just one's all past and one's all future, but they're both operating under many of the same types of things that in most scholars do not operate under either dispensationalist, or they don't operate under those categories. They try to avoid categories altogether. In other words, the biblical language is a lot more loose than, say, a dispensationalist or a full preterist would come and want to define all of these technical terms that have one meaning and one meaning only, and that's the meaning that it has. Most scholars would get away from that kind of stuff. But that's neither here nor there. I read Max King and I was enthralled by it. Became a full preterist back in 92, 93. And then nothing much came of it. I had my business there in Florida and stuff, and went to church and didn't really, but C. Jonathan Sry came out with a book, The End of All Things, where he is strongly criticizing full preterists. And I had never heard this. Here's a guy, and I'm at Reformed Theological Seminary doing my Hebrew, and I saw this book, and I read it, and I'm like, man. So then I write Misplaced Hope, and as a response, and I wrote that like in 3 months. I said, here's a response. Tim King, Max's son, picked it up. And then R.C. Sproul comes out with his book, Last Days According to Jesus. And here he's mentioning Ed Stevens and Ed King, or Max King, and I can't believe it. I'm like, little old Max King in Ohio is being mentioned by this stalwart R.C. Sproul. So now I'm like, man, full preterism's on the map. I can't believe this. And we were excited. And then there's where I met Don Preston, Larry Siegel, William Bell. It's around 1999, 2000. That's when I fell in league with them. And the rest is, for the next 10 years, we were pushing this as much as we could push it. Back in 2003, 2004 through about 2008, there were about 4 or 5 conferences a year, where a couple of hundred people would show up at these things, and we were going everywhere. Because Keith Matheson came out with their book, Jay Adams was coming out, and then of course Tommy Eisen came out with his book, and so it was like full preterism was there, and there it was being talked about. Even N.T. Wright and Clark Pennock and others had made mention of it, and so we were like, man, we're really pushing the headway. And by that time, Don Preston was still is the most heavily published. Don is a tireless worker. This guy is constantly putting out material. So that's just how that was. I fell into it. I understand how people would fall into it. It's just things more. But I'll leave that. I don't know if I've raised any questions or answered them. That's where I was at the moment. I fully was entirely convinced, of it. I saw it. I see it very clearly.
I do have one question for you, if you don't mind. And that is, when you were a full preterist, you obviously held to the early dating of Revelation. But now, you're a partial preterist. Have you changed that position?
No.
Or the early version, the early dating? Okay.
Yeah. No, I still side with Dr. Gentry on that. I think he's done a great. Well, he's probably done the most thorough. Mark Hitchcock just recently wrote a book about the dating where he's taking Gentry specifically, and Hitchcock does a lot of footnoting. He's got a lot of. So you got Hitchcock on one hand for post 70, and you've got Gentry on the other.
But it's my understanding
that's where it's at. That's just where the argument's at now. So.
It's my understanding that most all of church believes that it's the later dating. Like I've got Gregory Beale's book on Revelation,
Yeah.
And so like the majority of them believe that it's afterwards. So
yes,
there we're sort of going against the grain of church tradition.
Gentry was. He wasn't. There was no creedal thing. Revelation was written, and
right.
But the flow of the argument. And Bill mentions Gentry. He footnotes Gentry's book Before Jerusalem. Him and Gentry and Bill are very good friends. And then Bill Gentry's working on 2 volumes. He's done on his commentary. It's like 2,000 pages commentary on Revelation. It's insane. And that's it. Gentry's done. He said, I'm done, finished. I'm done writing. So, Bill and Wright, they still And there, you know, there's a lot of it's one of those arguments where you can see the statistics on both sides, and you're like, yeah, man, some good arguments over here, and there's some really good arguments over here, and where do you come down at? Well, I'm still early date, but I've got other reasons, you know, for that. But, you know, is that a point that I'm going to use as a proof no, I don't think you can. There's just too much there where you can't. It's a good argument. It's very persuasive. It's not absolute. And people hate hearing that. I hate hearing that. I want absolute, you know, but there it is. But I am a pre-70. I think John wrote, you know, 65, 66, somewhere around there.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. And that might change.
So when was it that pretty much you started to see something different?
A lot of it was existential, just experiential, subjective kind of stuff. It was we were really kind of riding a wave there, and of course I was ordained. Kelly Burks. We went through a ordination thing and had a church because there was a congregation meeting in St. Petersburg, and they had read my book Misplaced Hope, and so we started. And I was living in Orlando at the time, and so I sold everything, sold the business, moved the family over there, made great sacrifices, and then started the church basically. And we had bylaws. We incorporated. We had a bylaw. We had the whole 9 yards. So we were one of the few full preterist churches. And of course, we hosted Don Preston with Tommy Ice, and then James Jordan. We got James Jordan to come and debate Don Preston, and he still sells all that stuff. When we were Christ Covenant Church.
I can interrupt.
So, yeah.
You were in that church. Were you sort of in the Reformed sort of persuasion?
Yes. I never left that.
Okay, so you were a full preterist, but yet you were in Reformation. Okay, because that's what a lot of state that we're in now.
You're right. That's actually a good point. The foundation that was laid for me was Reformed because of the Professor Robinson that I told you earlier about. He introduced me to all of that, and so I just fell into it. And then I read John Calvin's Institutes. Of course, in seminary, you've got to go through that entire book line by line. And it just, there it was. And I thought, well, the principles here are just instrumental. I mean, you can't, this is, I had been raised in a Arminianist, free will and all of that kind of stuff. That's all I heard all my life. And so it just, that I just saw it, for right or wrong, whatever, I'm a Calvinist. It just, that never left. So I came into full preterism as a Reformed Calvinist, and I never left that. In fact, I've been criticized that the only reason why I left is because full preterism does not work with Calvinism. And many full preterists have told me you need to change your Calvinism. I wasn't willing to do that. I was like, I'm convinced of these things, and I don't think. But that's, it was, well, the thing that got it rolling was, I was at first becoming discouraged because we were noticing 2009, 2008, the fragmentation. We were a small group, the full preterism was not a huge, it is what it is. But we were fragmenting so fast. And, I was keeping my pulse with Don. We were keeping our pulse. I mean, because I was friends with Ed Stevens on that side of the camp, and then Don Preston, of course, on that side of the camp. And then we had the Covenant Creationists. And of course, I was friends with Jeff Vaughn and Tim Martin. And, we all knew each other. All of us, we were all close, and we all knew each other. So but the fragmentation and then the infighting and everything, it was very discouraging. I was like, man, we can't afford this right now. We're killing each other, and we're not even out of the barrel yet. So that was discouraging, and that did cause me to, and again, subjective. You know, it just put a kind of a red flag. It's like, maybe is something, you know, not right here. And then this whole thing, I'm always reading on topics, and I was reading on infinity at the time, and that's what kind of started it. It just, that word last day stuck with me, and then I knew the Westminster Confession, the elect of God's people is a number that cannot be increased nor diminished. It is a fixed number. And I thought, now wait a minute, if it's a fixed number, Don and I are teaching infinite procreation. We're teaching that history will never end. That's a direct contradiction. If God knows all, then that's a contradiction. That I'm a logic smith. You know, I couldn't wrap my mind. And a many full preterists said, well, it's a paradox. I don't like paradoxes.
That's one of the questions. Herman Johnson's radio broadcast, you had mentioned, well, God is infinite, so he would know the definite number of the kingdom that was in there. But then we have scriptures where it says, you know, your government there shall be no end to the increase of your government.
Right.
So we see a continuing continuation of that. So what I'm saying is that I'm not willing to place God outside of time and space, whereas I think outside of time and space, and for us, infinity would be different than what he would think.
Yeah, well,
Logically,
that took on, you know, studying the topic, and then I just dove into the library and dove into this topic and was amazed. You know, just it's a, you know, the Greeks prior to Christ, the Greeks were struggling with this idea. Infinity is like this wrecking ball. It comes in and just destroys once you think you got it, then infinity comes along and it just blows everything out of the water. And they didn't know quite how to wrestle with it because of the absurdities entangled with it. And
right. Well,
then comes Christianity. Well, go ahead.
What I can see is that there's infinity, there's spatial aspect, there's a temporal aspect. So we have no problem coinciding God with the spatial aspect because God is omnipresent.
Right.
But then you're saying, well, God has to. You're having to place God within. Doesn't make sense to me that you can satisfy the spatial, but you can't satisfy the temporal. But God is. So even though we get temporal, he would be able to inside. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, the arguments that I was getting back, this again got back into areas that that were foundational to me, that I would never, I was just so, and still am so convinced of. So I don't know if you're familiar with Clark and Van Til and all that kind of stuff. You know, Clark, his epistemology was, you know, God thinks in terms of logic. And, you know, there's some reform that say, well, no, you know, there's paradox, there's antinomy, there's all that kind of stuff. And Clark, and there's a whole host of other within Calvinism, a long history. You know, they don't accept those types of things. And I certainly, you know, I didn't. So, I still don't. It's just the way my mind, I just couldn't. So, at least from the perspective I was saying, if you're going to argue an epistemology along these lines, then full preterism cannot be true. Now, if you're going to argue an epistemology along these lines, then perhaps you can float full preterism. But I'm not going to argue along those lines. I choose to argue along these lines. I realize that's not a proof nor a demonstration, but it is, you know, where my mind, I have legitimation anyway. I mean, it's legitimate. I'm not arguing irrationally or anything. I think it's irrational to suggest God, you know, space is not infinite. Neither are the number of the stars, of which he knows them by name. He knows them all. That we can't wrap our mind in terms of what that is, but we can propositionally state it, that God knows all things, including the last number. He knows there is no infant. There's no infant. So what happens in church history, as I was reading and all of it, was they took that problem of infinity, they defined it in terms of eternality. And eternality and infinity are two different things. And they basically got rid of the problem of infinity because God is from A to B and all things in between. And there is no infinity, the way that the Greeks thought of it. So basically, in the creedal, the fathers in the 3rd and 4th century, they basically redefined the word infinity and got rid of it. Because you can't have the Greek idea of infinity and ever increasing. You can't have that and God who knows all things, and because there's no all in infinity. If you know all, you can always add one more. There is no all. All is contained, and infinity has no. It's in fact the very name Preterism means uncontained. It's unbounded. There is no bound to it. It's just it's unbounded. There's no A. There's no B. There's no Z. There's no D. There's nothing. And so if something is infinite, then it's nothing. It means nothing. That's the problem they kept running into. And that's the problem I kept running into. And I thought, well, okay, so what would happen if full preterism has a end of history? Now, there were some full preterists that would say, yeah, eventually history's going to, the sun's going to burn out and whatever. But then that would introduce a last day. So you can see where it started pinching away at my, whether right or wrong, it just, for me, I'm just relating my own experience. It just it left me uneasy. It's just like, well, maybe there is an end of history. Well, if there's an end of history, then there's a last day. Well, then God would know that last day. If there was an end of history, then he would know that last day. But wouldn't he have revealed that in scripture that there was a last day? Then I started reading, he knows all things from beginning to end. He is with the first generation unto the last. God has set eternity in the heart of man from beginning to the end. So I would start quoting this stuff to full preterists, and they'd say, well, the end in Ecclesiastes, that's 80-70. Everything was 80-70. And I'm like, well, if you assume 80-70, you're going to see 80-70 everywhere you go, and that's not acceptable to me. It's like he's with the first generation, and he is also with the last. Larry Siegel said, well, he's with the last generation of Israel. That's what that's talking about. And I'm like, there's not a scholar or a commentary in the world that you would find to support that reading of Isaiah. Nobody. You're on your own here. And that made me a little uncomfortable too. I realized Martin Luther and all, but Luther drew from John Huss, and he could also draw from Augustine and draw from a great deal of others. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like he made up something. He was troubled by what he was reading. And he was reading a lot of Augustine, being an Augustinian monk. So he was reading a lot of Augustine. He couldn't square with what was going on in his day and what Augustine was saying, and Gottschalk and so a few of the others that he was reading. So, I've been criticized a lot on that, but that's just my own, that's just what happened to me. And I don't see anything irrational with it. People change their views. I went from a futurist to a full preterist. That doesn't prove full preterism. Just because you get a futurist converting to full preterism doesn't prove full preterism any more than a Christian turning an atheist makes an atheist proof. It's just people change their.
I was curious. I understand where you're coming from, and I can definitely see that point of view. How do you kind of bring together the timely statements from a full preterist view to the view you have now?
Yeah, well, naturally, you got to go back and look at all of this. Mm-hmm. So that took a long time, and Jason and I and a few Todd Dennis and a few others who were coming out. We started like, what do you do here? What do you do with it? First, the resurrection of the dead wasn't John 6. And see, here's the thing. John 6, and this is one of the chapters in the book. Here's a great. You guys are Calvinists, right? So here's one of the great classical passages of Calvinism. the Father has given all unto me, and I shall draw all unto me, and I shall likewise lose none of them that the Father has given to me, but likewise shall draw all to myself, and will raise them up at the last day. See, is 80-70 the last day? Then Calvinism at that point can't use that verse anymore. It's gone. And that's one of the main Calvinist verses. I mean, before I became a full preterist as a Calvinist, that's what John 6 was one of our favorite ones to go to. No man can pluck them out of my hand, but I will raise them up at the last day. And he says this like 5 times. And when I had an end of history, there's last day, and then I saw that all, and then of course with Westminster, no number can be added nor decreased from God's elect. Of course, I'm a Calvinist, so elect is a fixed term. And that's where all that dovetailed. And then now I have to go back and look at these time texts. Well, preterism has a long history, as you know. 80-70 is nothing new. You have Josephus, Irenaeus, Justin. They all refer to the destruction of temple, the Epistle of Barnabas. I mean, all of them, they all do. So, there's no biggie there. It's, what do you do with this? Well, a lot of these near statements that we were using were not, as you may, I'm sure you already know, near, the Greek word can be used spatially, or it can be used in terms of time, or it can be used, this bowl is near, it's right here, it's near. It can be used that way. God is near. In fact, when you go back in the Hebrew scriptures, you see that used a lot in the Septuagint. O Israel, what other nation can say their God is so near?
Yeah, we give a lot of
so
weight.
you have that,
We give
so,
quite a weight here.
Yeah. And that eliminated a lot. Jesus said, if you see the Son of Man doing this, casting out demons, then you know that the kingdom of God is what? It's right. It's right in front of your face. You're watching demons being cast out. The kingdom of God is near. It's right. You're looking right at it. So that eliminated a lot of that near stuff. And then the word melo was always a tricky word, and I never used that word as a proof. A lot of full preterists did, but we did a massive study on that along with some other, but that word was always just one of these tricky little, mellow is a tricky little word. It's just one of these words, but it does mean certainty. It does carry with it that idea of certainty. And it does mean something about to happen. For instance, I'm about to go to the bathroom. So a Greek scholar explained, he said, when you see those listed and you see that word about to, that's the English equivalent, the way it's used in English. For instance, how would you use the phrase about to? That's, well, I'm about to take out the trash. Exactly. And that's what it means. And then he would show me places Paul was about to speak before King Agrippa. The ship was about to break apart. There it means something, but it's something right there. It's about to happen. So to use it, Jesus saying, the Son of Man is about to come. Well, no, there it wouldn't work because he's 30 years off and it doesn't carry with it. So there it means, as is translated, the Son of Man is going to come. And it can certainly mean that. So mellow was not really an issue there. The other thing was I noticed in my own, I was believing in full preterism in 70 AD. So, and you guys, that this phenomena exists with us just being all too human. If you want to see something, you're going to find it. You know what I mean by that?
Yeah.
If you're looking for something, you're going to find it.
Although I'm resistant to full preterism, and yet I could still find it.
Right.
The one verse I think that actually changed me completely over, and I said, I'm tired of doing this. I can't do this anymore. I was looking at this generation, and I was thinking, well, that's talking about the generation that will take place. But then my friend Zach on here, he was telling me about Revelation 22, and it's verse 14. Blessed are those who wash their robes so that they may have the right to the tree of life and may enter by the gates into the city. Outside of the city are the dogs and the sorcerers and the immoral persons and the murderers. And so here we've already established in Revelation chapter 20 that the city is coming down in 21 and 22, and we know that the city is the bride of Christ. It's very clear.
Right.
That, and then all of a sudden, outside of the city are these people that I thought were completely gone and destroyed. And so then that sort of opened me up to where the tree of life, the leaves were for the healing of the nation. And I'm thinking, well,
Right.
why do nations need healing for that? If everything was restored, I was thinking of a physical thing, just like in the book of John. We always see, you know, Nicodemus was being told, well, how can a man be born when he is old? Can he enter a second time into his mother's womb? And yet here we also
Right.
have a woman at the well that was actually looking for physical water, where Jesus said, you know, about the water of life. So, and then when people were asking, you know, he's like, I am the bread of life. And then he was talking about, you need to eat my flesh and drink my blood. And they were always thinking of physical, tangible ideas, and they were getting into trouble from that because that's not what he was trying to explain to them. And so I started to realize from that point that maybe I need to back up and actually start looking at this more of the way that the Bible interprets itself.
Sure. Yeah.
And so that's what actually really kind of changed me, is the book of Revelation, the chapter 22 specifically.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you, everything that you're saying. And
But I have to admit, I was absolutely resistant to this. I did not want this because I was a full futurist several months ago, and I would look up into the sky. I mean, every evening when I prayed the Aaronic benediction over all my animals, because I live on a farm, I would look up to the sky and I'd like, please let me see him come now.
yeah, which would be cool. And that gets into another issue. See him now. But to get back to what, that verse there outside of the city, that was a key one. Because with David Chilton and post-millennialism, which is all post-millennialists are preterists. Not all preterists are post-millennialists, but all post-millennials are preterists. They had that outside the city. He contrasts that, though, with Revelation 21 and consummation, where you see outside the city, no unclean thing shall enter into it. In other words, everything inside and outside is clean. Right now, everything outside the city is, you got the wicked, right now. That's not the way it's always going to be. Revelation 21, no unclean thing shall ever into it, and the nations shall bring in their glory. In other words, it's all good. There's no dogs anymore outside the city. They're gone. So that, I saw that and I was like, oh, that kind of, and then there's a lot to get into. There's the trampling of the wrath outside the city. I think in Revelation 14, it says, and he'll trample them on the wrath outside the city. Well, what city is he talking about there? Well, that's the wrath of those that are deserved to be trampled on the outside of the city. That's the wicked. And then after all of this trampling and all of this, destruction, you have this great white throne kind of judgment. I've been going back through Revelation, and I would love to do a series, but a lot of that has loosened up. I'm getting out of my dispensationalism. I'm getting out of these categories that this must mean that, and it must happen within that and here, and it just not. It really doesn't. And if you read the prophecy, the scholars that have really spent their whole lives, not dispensationalists, just scholars who really just spent their whole lives trying to understand. These terms are not static terms. These are very fluid terms. They can be used in senses of total absurdity and fantastic images that just boggle the mind when we read them and try to imagine or picture them. Well, that's their point. That's the whole point. It's topsy-turvy. This is crazy. It's chaos. It's wrath. And but we want to come along in the West and say, well, this is that, and that means that, and that connects here, and that means that. And it just doesn't work that way. And dispensationalism is an all too American approach. And full preterist, I think I was a full preterist. I came in through those categories, and I looked at Revelation as the full preterist. I was looking at it as a full preterist dispensationalist. And so I was able to just, here's some charts, and we'll make some charts. Scholars don't like charts. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work that way. And I know that we don't like that. We're uncomfortable with that. I want certainty. I want absolute. I want to know what this means.
I think I can speak for I think I can speak for everyone on this panel that we would love to hear you do a series on the Book of Revelation. But unlike
good. Well, that's confirmation.
unlike James White, though, we would like you to open up the comments so that we can actually comment with you and carry on a dialogue, because
that'd be great. Yeah, that'd be great. I mean, hopefully you can hear my tone. I mean, I'm full preterism is a heresy and all of that, and I certainly say all of that. And there's one way of saying something where it's meant. It is according to, as I think a gentleman said here before we even opened up, according to Creedalism, it is a heresy. I was saying that when I was a full preterist. In fact, I've got it in my book where I wrote it as a full preterist. If you're going to follow the church history and the creeds, full preterism is a heresy. There's no way around it. It is.
Right.
But according to the scripture, is it a heresy? So then we'd shift the argument over to that, which rightly Gentry and others said that yes, you can do. Just because it's a new teaching doesn't mean that it's necessarily false.
Right. It's just our approach of hermeneutics. And I just have one argument that, let's say that the Lord did come back in AD 70. Okay. And then.
Well, he did. There was a coming of the Lord in AD 70.
Let's say that was the one and final coming, and that was the last day. Okay.
Yeah.
And
right. Okay. Yeah.
How many years would it take before people would start to reevaluate and say, well, look, either he's never going to come back, or he did come back and we missed it? How long would that take for that? Would it be 5 million years, or would it be 2,000 years? At some point, there's going to be something that would appear to be a new teaching, but yet it would be a reformation of doctrine. And that's kind of where I'm at right now, too. I mean, eventually...
That's where we went with misplaced hope. That was my whole thesis of misplaced hope, was based on that. And it was a thorough study in 1st and 2nd century eschatology. And I'm quoting the apologists, the early church fathers, as much as possible, quoting all of that source that was there. And then the scholars, you had like Schweitzer and Dodd and others saying there was a crisis of the parousia and all of this bunch of other. So they were starting to see it. And so you don't see this study of eschatology really until the last 120 years in the church, where it really just got really focused on. And then, of course, in the 19th century, you had all these millennial movements, the Millerites and the Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses. Everybody was into this last day stuff at the turn of the century. They were all, you had all the Seventh-day Adventists.
Right.
They were coming out of the woodwork. Mormonism, Last Day Saints, Jehovah's Witnesses, all of them. They were all millennial movements. Dispensationalism, the charismatic movement. The gifts will be poured out in the last days, Azusa Street in California. The Keswick Convention, they were living in the last days, and what would happen? Well, Spirit's going to be poured out, and you'll see prophecies and visions and speaking tongues. All of that kind of happened, and we're recovering from that. We're looking at all of this like, wow. And then you have Russell and Terry and scholars that were saying, hey, we need to. But then there was a lot of others that were saying this. And then you get Eusebius, of course. He's saying it, Jerusalem temple. And most people from where I was from I grew up in the church. I was baptized at the age of 6 at the Foursquare Gospel Church. I've always been in church. And I never, up until the time I got in my junior year in Bible college, ever heard of Josephus or the fall of the Jerusalem temple. Never. Right. So when you go back and you start reading these old dead guys, these old scholars, they're mentioning it all over the place.
Right.
So you're like, man, where's this been? And that's part of the excitement of it, is like you've discovered something that it's a treasure trove of, and this scripture, this generation, and now it makes sense. Everything makes sense. Those outside the city, because you can picture it. And the New Jerusalem is the church, but of course you got to get rid of the physicality of everything. And there is where there is another place I was running into problems, because the Bible doesn't make this radical separation as the Greeks did between spirit and matter. They are joined. Creation, God breathed. You have spiritual and they go hand in hand. They're never separated. And in Hebraic mind, they did not ever separate. In fact, their life's existence was so much so that the production of seed, of children, was the essence of keeping their life on earth. Because that was the essence of keeping your life going. That was their spiritual life, was your life on earth. And it was tied to it. And there was no separating of it because God created body and soul and fused them together. So
right, and man,
the Greeks just could not get that. They just didn't get it. They didn't. And resurrection of the dead, forget about it. There's no way. That is uniquely Jewish and uniquely Christian. That was the only two religions coming up, and then later Islam, of course, but they got it from the Christians. But Muhammad got it from the Catholics.
Right.
He borrowed it. It was a revelation from Allah. It just looks like what the Catholics were teaching. I guess Allah speaks like Catholics, but whatever.
Yeah, and it's the gospel of Thomas. It's
the gospel of Allah. I don't know, whatever. Right. But that created a problem because that entered into the issue of the resurrection body of Christ, to which you all, I'm sure in this room, would affirm Jesus was bodily raised from the dead, and it was an empty tomb. No full preterist that I know of has surrendered that one yet. So, but that raises questions. To which Don Preston said, well, he shed his earthly body when he ascended. Well, I had problems with that one. I thought,
they tie that into the circumcision or something William Bell was talking about when he was saying he had.
Yeah, that was a big one for me.
But there's several of us that have no problem with that, because I think it's in is it 1 Corinthians chapter 5 or 2 Corinthians chapter 5. Paul actually talks about, I cannot be with you in body, but I am with you in spirit. So there are several of us in this room that actually believe that, yes, there is flesh and bone up on the throne, but yet he can be with us in spirit. We don't have a problem with that. So we don't really hold to William.
Well, that's Chalcedon. What you're citing there is Athanasian and Chalcedon. Okay. That's Nicene. What you just cited there is Nicene. The human Jesus, the man, Christ Jesus, the 6'5", whatever he is at the right hand of God, the human being, continually incarnate. That's what they meant by that in the human nature of the two natures of the Logos. They meant human nature, they meant body and soul, reasonable body and soul. Yet, because the Logos is omnipresent, but because two natures together, so you also have the human, I am always with you. Well, he's also Logos, he's divine, so he's omnipresent, but those are incommunicable attributes that cannot be communicated to the man, Christ Jesus, who is not omnipresent. He must remain in heaven. Absolutely. Where is Jesus? In heaven. So the Christology, I never surrendered that. Don Preston surrendered it. So that was a big problem with me. I thought, oh man, that's wow. Right. I thought we're just dealing with eschatology. Now we're entering into Christology.
Right. So I noticed in your radio broadcast, you were saying, well, full preterists don't need to call themselves Christians because not only is their eschatology different, but their Christology is different. Soteriology is different. All these things are different. But yet, we are, well, most of us, there are some here that probably do believe that Christ had shed his physical flesh. But there's others here that say we have no problem with that, and that does not contradict full preterism for us.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think that it does contradict full preterism. Don and I would talk about this. Don understands that if the human being body of Jesus ascended and was glorified into heaven, then that introduces the idea of a individual bodily resurrection glorification, to which his idea in 1 Corinthians 15 has nothing to do with the physical body whatsoever. So you can't have that, so he gets rid of it. Even for Jesus, he gets rid of it. Because if you introduce the idea of an individual glorified human body, Jesus Christ, then you've introduced a glorified individual human body. And now you've ran into those issues. Now you've got the debate between Ed Stevens and Don Preston. Because see, Ed Stevens never left that.
Okay.
That's why Ed Stevens affirms there was a rapture, a literal rapture in AD 70. There was a literal resurrection of the dead in AD 70. And of course, Don Preston has nothing to do with it. Well, there you go. Ed holds to the continuing incarnate body of Christ at the right hand of God. Don doesn't. Don's view is more spiritual. Ed's is literal rapture. You can see now why these two are going at it, because Ed thinks Don's off his rocker, and Don thinks Ed's off his rocker. And they're both they're both nice guys, but they really go at it on this stuff. And
Or
that was the issue.
Or they're both off the rocker.
They're both off their rocker.
Sorry, that's the only futurist that's in this room right now. Just said that. So.
Yeah. Hey, good.
I do have a question for you. They're calling me a futurist. How funny. What I noticed with a lot of preterists, they have a problem with time frames. What I mean by that is that we're in the year 2017, and it seems like that they have a time. They have a problem with God's time, and what I mean by that is that when they read scriptures, when they read something that says, the near the kingdom of heaven is near, anything with near in it, and it's like this generation will not pass away. They're having a problem with what I see, at least, is that connecting that to something that could be foreshadowing in the future. So they're like, well, it's year 2017. We haven't seen him come back yet, and it's like it's like, well, if he doesn't, if he didn't come then why would he come in year 2017? So like, how would you kind of approach it?
Look, hold on. I can find it here somewhere. There it is. I was looking for my Bible. It was up there on the pulpit. Here's the thing, and this, I didn't even see this going into it. We argued as full preterists, Don and I, and thousands of others of full preterists, we would argue, using the Old Testament, there were many comings of the Lord. He came to Babylon, he came to Edom, he came to, and the language that was used was this deconstruction, decreation kind of language, apocalyptic language. And there were many of these. For instance, Sodom and Gomorrah. I'm going to come down. Well, that's a parousia of the Lord. And the word, the cognate word of parousia is periemi. And periemi is used all the time in the Old Testament. The Greek translation of the Hebrew would use this word periemi, which is presence. I'm appearing, I'm coming. Well, there's a lot of these things in the Old Testament. They're all over the place. And they'd use this language of stars falling out of the sky. And you guys know all this stuff.
Right, yeah, apocalyptic language.
Yeah, right. It's all over the place. In Psalm 18, Psalm 18 is one of the oldest Psalms. And it's just full of it. He parted the heavens, he came down, dark clouds were under his feet, he mounted the cherubim, he flew down, he soared, he made darkness his canopy, out of the brightness of his presence, clouds, advanced, hailstones, bolts of lightning, the Lord thundered, and on and on and on and on. He reached down from on high and grabbed me. There's your rapture. He reached down from on high, he grabbed me, he drew me out with deep waters, he rescued me. He saved him. We always think of the term salvation in terms of justification by faith. Sometimes it means just God saved you from me tripping down the stairs the other day. I thanked God that I didn't fall down. Thank you, Lord, for saving me. Sometimes the word means that. It just, God saved you. You didn't fall off that cliff there. You should have slammed into that car, but you didn't. And right. I always thank God when those moments out. First thing out of my mouth, thank you, Jesus. He's just saved me from a really bad accident. So that language, and with those comings, and Don so eloquently, I think it's in his book, the cloud, elements shall melt with fervent heat, or something like that. Don wrote a book on 2 Peter 3. And he goes into this whole thing. He quotes these scholars, and he says, this is what these days of the Lord mean. Day of the Lord. There were many days of the Lord. And they would have this constituent language with it that identified with it. And there were many times that, the Lord came and all this other stuff. Well, I thought, well, okay. So let's say he came in AD 70, which he did. That had all the language there. But yet I can't get away from resurrection of the dead at the end of time, or last day. So assuming that last day is speaking of that. Well, what language would the Apostle Paul use for that? What other language would he use for that? He would use apocalyptic language. So the distinction then, and N.T. Wright really does a job of showing this, is the context. Paul, talking about resurrection of the dead in 1 Corinthians 15, nowhere mentions the destruction of the temple, Jerusalem. In Matthew 24, nowhere is it mentioned resurrection of the dead. The language is the same because it's apocalyptic, and these are comings of the Lord. And what other language would they use to describe these inbreakings of God at the end of history, or in AD 70, or in 1945, or 1972, whenever? A prophet would have looked at Nazi Germany, and had he seen the events of Nazis, let's say Isaiah was alive in 1921, how would he have pictured? Well, he would have saw a beast, and he would have saw a horn, Hitler, and maybe 3 other horns, Himmler, and let's see, Hess, Himmler, and the other guy, Goebbels. There's 3 horns, and there's 1 horn out of this beast, and they trample on well, that's how a prophet would have saw them. That's how you would have pictured them. So we've seen these beasts. There are many of them. We've seen Greece, Media Persia. We've seen France. We've seen Nazi Germany. We've seen communist Russia. We've seen Pol Pot. These are beasts. And so I started thinking, God doesn't have to reveal to us every single generation of when these cataclysms are going to happen in terms of earth-shaking, world-shaking events. I can discern through the patterns I've already been given numerous times in scriptures, the signs of the times. I can almost predict economic collapse because the gold is dross, there's inflation, and the poor are being oppressed and crushed. Isaiah chapter 1. And what do we have going on today? Isaiah chapter 1. Economic collapse, the poor are suffering as a result, and your leaders are completely and entirely bankrupt, and your dross is interested so much that the gold has lost its value because the money has lost its value, drop in currency. These are not new things. This is when God shows up. And now I can apply apocalyptic because it always intrigued me. Gary DeMar did a whole study on why virtually every generation, or sometimes they'd skip a generation, always thought they were in the last days.
Right.
It's easy to know why, because these events play themselves out they've been rehearsed on stage over and over and over and over and over again. We know that what man is going to do with power. We know what he's going to do with power, money, and corruption. We know what he's going to do in God. We've seen it. There's nothing new under the sun, and God shows up and God judges it. And there will be a final time when God judges it. So it's interesting. It was always interesting to me that full preterists were always ultra conservatives. In terms of their politics, they were always ultra conservatives. Well, yeah, because we understand government, and we know that government's corrupt. It tends towards corruption, and ultimately it tends towards collapse. America is not an exception. We've watched this throughout history. Kings rise, kings fall. God sets them up, God sets them down. It's all towards his glory. So that freed up, for me, having that historic perspective and accounting for the last 2,000 years of the gospel, which I think is a large elephant in the room for full preterism, is, 2,000 years for the futurists, they say, is a big problem because Jesus said soon. Well, I can see that. But 2,000 years is a big problem for you who say everything is fulfilled, because now how do you account for the last 2,000 years? What do you do with it? And that's a big problem. And full preterists are all over the page in terms of what to do with 2,000 years of church history and God being involved in church history, unfolding what it is that we've unfolded. You're benefiting from it as a full preterist for Martin Luther and the Bible that was collected by the church fathers. They collected all this stuff together. So that means the Holy Spirit's still active. So you have to account for all of that stuff. These were areas where I was still wanting to push it, but I was being criticized, and this is why I was a full preterist. I was being criticized because all prophecy is fulfilled. And I'm like, well, maybe there's ongoing fulfillment. And Larry Siegel and Don Preston were like, no, there's not ongoing fulfillment. All things are fulfilled. And I'm like, well, how do you account for the salvation of the nations, though?
Right.
You got to deal with this stuff, you know.
I hear all prophecy is fulfilled. I think that more as a clickbait or a marketing tool to get you to be interested in what you're talking about. But I mean, all prophecy is not fulfilled because I'm not standing before Christ in judgment or so after my death. So we still don't prescribe to William Bell or Don Preston's view of.
Oh, okay. Well, that's great.
But yet we do think that a great majority of it and that has occurred in 70 AD. Except for
they have the problem. We would bring up the idea of sin in the Bible. What do Christians still sin? And there were some full preterists saying, well, no, we don't sin anymore because all sin's been done away with. And I'm like, well, I'm a recovered alcoholic, so you might want to address that one again because what do I call that? Well, that's just problems of the flesh. Well, there's no more flesh anymore because I've died in the flesh and I've been fulfilled and crucified in Christ. So that can't apply anymore. So what do you call sanctification? They were running into all these problems, and I still wanted to kind of see that. And that was when I was a full preterist, I was running into these problems because I still wanted to apply to everyday life and struggle that would be in terms of flesh and spirit. But now I was being told, well, that's old covenant, new covenant that was struggling in the first century. That struggle only had to do with that. It had nothing to do with your struggle with sin today.
Right.
And I'm like, but you're leaving a good deal of the church. I can't relate.
Right.
Anyway.
We preterists, we're leaning toward what we're actually doing or practicing. Because a lot of us, most of us here absolutely are most concerned about now. And
definitely.
Not futurist, where we're thinking, oh, well, there's nothing to do. We just need to look at the sky and not look on the ground. We're actually doing things. I play my harp for people at the nursing home and for people at the hospital.
Oh, awesome.
It's all about now, and what we can do to promote the kingdom. So this is not an argument that a partial preterist or futurist can present to us that, oh, we don't care anything about now because everything was done in AD 70. We absolutely know that the Spirit and the fingerprint of the Holy Spirit is operating in our lives. We share testimony all the time about how the fingerprint of the Holy Spirit has operated in our lives.
I guess my only issue there is, that's got into, again, the other issue of telos, the end, or telos, or goal, or aim.
Right.
Towards what is the Spirit, doing this? Is there a progressive nature to it? If there is, because I'm listening to, Don Preston and others saying if you introduce a telos to which we're progressing towards, then you're right back into, and I thought, well, yeah, you are. Because, well, you can't do that and call yourself a full preterist. I'm like, well, after a while, I agreed with Don. I said, I guess you can. I guess I'm leaving full preterism.
I wonder if you could introduce.
I don't know where I'm at now, but I said I'm not a full preterist, but I'm not a dispensationalist.
Right.
Come
I
back
wonder if you could introduce continuing teleos as a afterthought, after shadow, because it was so powerful that there's an after shadow effect that will continue on through. If maybe you could introduce it that way, that would coincide, I think.
I would encourage you guys from what I've heard, what you're doing, I would encourage you, because that's what at Christ Covenant Church that's what we were doing. But eventually that got us into a lot of trouble among the full preterists. We were saying ongoing fulfillment. The Spirit is drawing the nations in, And then, well, they drew the nations in. That was in the 1st century. That was fulfilled in AD 70. Isaiah 2 was fulfilled in the last days in AD 7. I said, well, when did he teach the nation? Well, he didn't teach the nations war. That was spiritual. So then I had another problem. Everything was becoming spiritualized. It's like the old preacher said, like you just alluded to, you're so heavenly minded, you're no earthly good. And that, it's because I love ministry and old folks' homes and addicts and alcohol. I like watching and being involved in that kind of, and watching lives change. That's physical. That's happening right there. How do you affect political theory? All of these questions for full preterism to be what it needed to be, we were pushing all of these bounds, and like it's got to have a political theory. How can it's the kingdom of God fulfilled? How would that not influence the world? It would have to. What would that look like? What kind of laws would it have? All of this kind of stuff. If it's going to be a system, then it has to address all of these questions. Well, now you've got full preterists that are saying that water baptism in the Lord's table is no longer useful. It's 1st century AD because you showed forth the Lord's death until he comes. I was really having a problem with all that because I love the Eucharist and all of the symbolism and all that it means. And to me, the Eucharist is very spiritual experience.
I've partaken that in a Presbyterian church. PCA.
Yeah. Oh, good. Oh, I hope so. There's a lot of full preterists that don't, and I think, man, you're cutting yourself off.
Right.
That's not good. I just don't want to mess with that. It's been there. Luther was battling against particular doctrines that had only grown up in the last, few centuries of his time. He was not dealing with the Trinity. He was not dealing with the establishment of the church. He was not dealing with the script. He wasn't dealing with he was dealing with a lot of stuff that had grown out, which Vatican II has now addressed. The Catholic Church post-Vatican II is not the Catholic Church of Martin Luther's day. Right. Not at all. Not at all. They addressed a lot of the stuff and realized that Protestantism, post-Council of Trent, Protestantism was making, it was successful. It was actually encouraging and influencing the world, and it was reaching out towards Catholics, and there was an ecumenical, that we can get a lot done together more than we can apart. And that's post-Vatican II. So now, see, I see all of that as fulfillment of prophecy. That's the world, the gospel covering the earth as the waters cover the sea kind of stuff. It just grows and grows and grows and grows like a mustard seed. It just grows and 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 grows until it saves all those whom the Lord has called. And then once that's done, you have the last day. When that is, no man knows the day or the hour. So, what do you do now? Well, live your life for God. Get out there and play your harp. Do that kind of stuff. I love that. Some people, like the book of Revelation, some people, I'm looking now, there's Adam Marshak, I think is this gentleman's name. Pretty brilliant, but he's full preterist. And now, as I was going back through Revelation, the millennium was always a problem because we didn't have the millennium between 30 AD and 70 AD. We had to stick it there. We couldn't, well, you can't. If you're full preterist, you can't. You have to place it there. Well, this reduces the symbol of 1,000. This was always a problem with me. And I thought, well, and I went along with it. I said, yeah, okay, well, it's 40 years. It represents that period of time. So that's what it is. But then you have the Roman beast and the mark of the name who are in the millennium. And these martyrs that before the millennium were not taking the mark of the beast, which would place the beast before the starting of the millennium. This is John Noe coming in and saying, you got a problem, that you can't have that. And we would, whatever. But now, full preterists are realizing that's a problem. So now the beast is not Rome. The beast is Judaism in the 1st century. How far are you going to go with this? To float this view before you start scratching your heads and thinking, you know what, maybe I need to go back and look at this. Or at least be open. I prefer to be just open, I hope that makes sense.
That's the best policy.
Yeah, just be open, Because like I said, I sold my business in Orlando, moved my family. That was catastrophic. You know, they went along. You know, my ex-wife, she wasn't happy about it. Now, hindsight, now, you know, years later, but you know, I mean, I believed this. I made great sacrifice. I believed this, and I promised myself coming out of this again. Other than, you know, of course, Jesus Christ is Lord. There's a few fundamental things I will never ever surrender. They're rock solid.
Right.
But as far as things like this, I'm never going to get people that, you know, are you a post-millennialist now? Or, you know, I said, I'm an all post-premillennialist. You know, depends on what I'm reading and what I'm studying right now. I can, you know, full preterism did create, it did, you know, it did cause for me to see that the church has neglected resurrection of the dead.
My friend Zach here on the one that has the not icon. He actually said the phrase, and I really like that phrase. He says, "This is where I'm at today. This is what I think today." I really like that and respect that very much.
That's fine. I don't believe I wasn't a Christian, even though I say, well, that's heretical and all. You know, I don't believe that I was not. You know, you're a Calvinist, right? So I'm talking to one of my own. You know, when I was sitting at a bar stool, just stoned out of my mind on Jim Beam and Coke, I believed that if I died at that moment, I'd go to heaven, because Christ was always. There's never any period in my life where I doubted Christ. I doubted myself. I left God, but God didn't leave me. That's you know, that's good Calvinism right there. You know, but you know, it just, and he you know, brought me back in. So I don't, you know, there's many wonderful people that are full preterists, and all that I say is just keep studying, keep looking at it, and be open minded, but don't get so locked in where you're like these 1611 King James version only kind of people. Just don't become like that, because you'll kill. It's like they tell Alcoholics Anonymous. Once you become a static organization, you've just ended your organization. You've just ended it.
Right. We've dealt
because now you got rules and you got to follow this and you got to be this and this is what a full preterist is. Well, you just killed yourself. You're done.
Well, yeah. That's the same way with the Hebrew roots too. A lot of us came out of that. It's just like, it's just so much, you know, down to the T on everything. If you're not doing this and you're not doing it right, and if you don't celebrate Passover this way, then you're you're doing it wrong. What do you think about the gentleman? I know he's kind of getting popular in the full preterist. I mean, I don't mean to name drop, but I think you have mentioned him before. Last name Milano, I believe it is.
Michael
Milano?
Yeah.
Michael Milano?
Yeah. He seems kind of young. Yeah. He's real passionate about what he does. That most definitely. I give him that. He definitely is passionate, you know.
Oh, no doubt. We had a debate. It's there on YouTube, on my YouTube channel. Actually, I think it's on there. Milano puts it out. I met Michael years ago. This was through Alan Bondar, who was down in Naples, Florida. And Milano used to live down in Florida, and then he went up to New York. He accepted a pastorate or something up there in New York. So we wanted to have this debate because I was just leaving full preterism and Milano was just coming in. And he's a fireball, you know, New York gang, drug, did time. You know, this guy, you know, and his presence when you meet him is like, man,
yeah,
this guy, he's intense.
Right, I give him that. He definitely is.
Yeah, so we got along. We were fun. We still do. We joke. I mean, we're totally at odds with each other, but we still kind of throw barbs back at it. No, he's. I told him this, so I'm not saying anything that I wouldn't say if he weren't in this room. I'd say the same thing to him as I've said to him. He's all over the place. On one hand, he sounds like a futurist, and then on the other hand, he's a full preterist. And then on the other hand, he's a full preterist that says that only full preterists are saved because full preterism is the gospel. Now, full preterism is not the gospel. You don't have to believe in full preterists to be saved.
He did retract that.
Say all these things, you know.
Yeah, he did retract that and said, "I'm a young man."
He did retract that. He said it. And I was like, you can't say that. You can't say that. No. What?
Yeah, I think it's right. I think it's like when you start to learn about something, you get a little boastful, you know, and
you're excited. Yeah.
You kind of say things that you like look back a little bit later and like, maybe I should have said that. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, most definitely.
We're all
well. We were always accusing the, I translate. So we were always, I was reading the translations, and then we'd come across certain, and we'd say, well, that's translation bias, because the translators are futurist, like there's a conspiracy or something. No, there's no conspiracy. These guys are just, I had by the grace of God, there at Reformed Theological Seminary, I had the opportunity of doing Hebrew for a year under Bruce Waltke, who is, he's got the book Biblical Hebrew, him and O'Connor, which is, one of the standard textbooks on intermediate Hebrew. So Waltke was on the committee of the New International Version of the Old Testament. So he's giving us his notes. And he always talked about translation being involved in interpretation. He said that there's always interpretation involved in translation. These two things are always going on. He said, but that very rarely happens. Most of what we're doing is in total 92% agreement on our translations. You do find those 8%. Usually it's on issues of baptism. He said, you get some Baptists on these committees, and you get some Presbyterians on it. And is it sprinkle, or is it immersion? Baptizo. How are we going to translate this word? So there's where you would get into that. But I asked him on eschatology, and he said, no, I said, what about world and age? He said, well, in Old English, world was an age. He said, we still use the term like that back in the old world.
Right.
That was the world back then. We still use it as the word age. That was the Roaring 20s. So that was the industrial age.
Right, so
we still use it like that. So there's no conspiracy.
Right.
As a full preterist, you should be able to pick up any Bible, any translation, and go through it and demonstrate full preterism, regardless of the translation. I've always said that about the gospel. I don't care. All people. Well, which translate? Give me the Amplified Bible, and I'll preach the gospel out of it.
We've shown the gospel with the New World Translation, or whatever the Jehovah's Witnesses use.
Wow.
Actually, use the show in there. That. So there's a couple of people that actually go with. We actually are studying Greek, and we're learning Greek. And I was actually a linguist in the Department of Defense, so I actually spoke Russian. But they've taught me how to approach any language at all. So I'm learning Greek as we speak, and so is another guy that's on here too. So we're really close with that. We really want to. We will read the English, but then we always want to go back to the Greek.
I think you should. If you know Greek, it's just. Now it's just a practice that I do. It's just I love my stepfather. May he rest in peace. This was my Bible back in Bible college. I've had this thing for like 30. And I just know where everything is. I never was a chapter and verse guy. I just know where it is in this book because I've flipped this thing so many times. I just know where it is. So I can flip to it.
We have among ourselves where we'll know that it's, on the right-hand top page, or something like that. We'll know where that scripture is.
Yeah. I just know where it's like the scrolls. Jesus unrolled them and he says, here.
Right.
I just knew where it was. And all these, I hate chapters. Now they're coming out with these Bibles that have no chapters and no verses. I love them. I love them. Fantastic.
Absolutely, because chapters and verses are all artificial.
That's the stuff up.
Hey, don't tell a KGV only that verse.
Yeah, right. But no, I would encourage anyone, if you can pick. I actually learned more about English when I was taking Greek.
Right.
English made more sense to me when I was taking Greek. I was like, oh, that's what a participle is.
Yeah, I had no idea about cases until I learned Russian.
Right. And so you doing Greek, and I encourage anyone to, I mean, now on the internet, I mean, you can do biblical. Heck, you can pick up any. I'm wanting to do.
Have you heard of
French?
Have you heard of the Bible called the Bible Polyglot?
Yes.
There's just a couple of us here that like that, and we have it. Even so, I've seen some mistakes in that, actually.
If you have the money, I use BibleWorks. The BibleWorks program, it's got Syriac, Aramaic, Josephus, all the church. It's got everything. Of course, you're gonna pay $800-900 to get all of them. But if you want to string together Greek phrases with particular conjugation, then you just type that in, put it in the code, and they all pop up in the Bible. All of them, all the usages. It's just the way to go. So now you can just get the basic fundamentals of Greek without, like in the old days, we had to learn the whole thing and then regurgitate it back, but you don't have to really do that even. Just go through fundamentals and use BibleWorks or a program like that. It breaks it down and tells you what the verb is. You know, it tells you everything. And then it has the Bauer, Art, and Gingrich Donaker dictionary there, and then it has Freiberg, and then it has, it's got everything. It's a wonderful time conserving, saving tool. It's just great. I recommend if you can get it. I think they have stuff like that online too. And I love the internet. I think it's a wonderful thing.
Right. Bible Hub is.
But I hope that we start a dialogue of sorts here, so that you don't see me as antagonistic I am antagonistic towards full preterism, but particularly Don. But it's wonderful to hear that you guys aren't following Don all the way down
Not
all
at
the way
all.
down the path there.
I don't want any type of antagonism between us. I really respect you. I wish you could have come to me ago when I was a futurist. It taught me how to fulfill how the damage has been done. So, I'm a full preterist. That's just the way it is. But hopefully, like some of the things that we approach, what we think, that if you're doing some of your videos, or like if you wanted to do a series on Revelation, we would love to hear that and actually spark up a dialogue with that as well, in the comments.
That's what I wanted to do next. I was talking to my son. I was just down in Florida with my two boys, University of South Florida, Go Bulls. One's going into constitutional law, and the other one's a Department of Philosophy. And so I was running around. It's like, what would you, they're watching my thing too. And they're like, what would you, and they said, you should do like Revelation or something, something real controversial. I said, well, Revelation is huge. That's huge. They said, well, don't make it huge. Just go through it. Boom, 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 boom. Just go through it. I'm like, oh, all right. I don't know. But you guys saying that, because I want to hear back from you too. I'm not, that's why I'm still interacting with, a lot of people that left full preterism don't even interact with it anymore. It's wrong. And that's the end of it. And they don't even deal with it anymore. But I know why I don't want to sound condescending here in any way, shape, or form. I understand why, and I sympathize. I get it. So
I can tell you,
if you can be condescending to me, if you can sympathize with me with where I'm at, then we're both sympathetic towards each other. So.
Right. I think that our lives would be much easier if we were not full preterists.
Oh yeah, it created all kinds of.
But for some reason,
yeah.
So just if you can sympathize with us on that part, but yeah, absolutely. I want to spark up a dialogue and a continuing relationship, and be able to call you friend.
Well, sure, yes, definitely. Are you guys familiar with this Michael Bull?
No.
Moses and Revelation. He's on Facebook. Michael Bull, Bull. if you Google his name, he's got Bible mates, he's got all kinds of stuff. But anyway, he likes to break down stuff into patterns. Everything he sees, everything in terms of pattern. So he breaks everything down. I don't know if you're familiar with the 5-point breakdown of covenantalism, like by Gary DeMar and those guys, Gary North, and they had 5 points of covenantalism. And that he breaks everything down into that. Like the book of Revelation, basically he's showing that Revelation is a giant worship service. It's a liturgical worship service with incense and everything. It's Levitical worship being carried out to its fullest extent. And
that's interesting.
Yeah, it is. You got the hymns, you got the psalms, you got the worship, the praise, the kneeling, you got the standing up, you got the kneeling down, you got the sitting down.
Right.
Everything of a church service. And he says this is a divine church service worship that John is participating in. Boy, that really changes your mind on. It's like, yeah, man, yeah. I like that because I'm into that kind of stuff. And I'm like, that's wow. This is a divine worship service, and here you have the prayers of the saints, the incense. God avenge us, and God answers their prayer.
I had I was meditating on, what we could do today and now, and I'm thinking about incense. And so to me, the true incense is go to a street person and embrace them and hug them and let their stench cover you. And to me, that incense, that stench would be to God the pleasing incense, better than the most expensive incense in the world, because that was done in love.
Yeah, see, now I like that because there's some guys I'm involved with, some addicts and stuff, and I'm, like I said, recovered alcohol. Man, these guys some of them are loose cannons. They're mined like by meth, which is really big up here in Indiana. This meth and heroin, like heroin's making a comeback. I never did heroin. I had an aversion to needles.
Yeah,
I'm corking a bottle or a thing of beer. I can drink beer all day long. Needles, that's not happening.
Right here in Ohio, I live in Ohio, so
same problem.
Yeah, we have literally, especially where I live on, the heroin epidemic. It's crazy here. Yeah, it's crazy.
I knew it was in Florida and stuff. Florida, you got more cocaine, but I came up here almost going on 3 years ago, and I never heard like this stuff. And they're like, yeah, they're cooking it out of their houses, and they're condemning houses like around. And I'm like, these are nice houses. These people are cooking meth in their house. I never heard. It's really bad. And we're losing a whole generation of young children whose parents go to church, and these kids are smoking crack and meth and everything. I'm like, what is going on here? This is nuts.
There's a missing generation there of. The problem is that what I've noticed was thank God for myself. Like my dad was a recovering alcoholic, and my whole family are addicts, but some reason it missed me, right? So after my dad became a recovering alcoholic, he actually became a minister. So I grew up in the church, you know what I mean? So but see, now is the kids that I grew up with that have kids now, and it's they don't talk to them about God. They don't talk to them about the reason why Jesus had to die. They don't even let them know the fundamental basics of what the gospel is, and when my kids
how it relates.
Right. So when my kids see me and they see me, if there's a homeless person on the corner and they see me reaching for my wallet and I go and give them money, and my kids will say something of like, well, Dad, what's he going to do with that money? You know what I mean? Do you think he may use it on drugs or alcohol? I said, you know what? It's not up to me to decide what he's going to do with that.
Right.
Hopefully he goes gets a meal, but that's not the reason why I'm doing it. I'm not giving him the money with the intention of having some type of role behind it. Hey man, make sure you go get yourself a hot meal with this. You know what I mean? And it's I hope that, I pray that he does that. You know what I mean? But it's just, the fact that we don't see that interaction anymore with with parents telling their kids, hey man, that conscience that's speaking to you when right or wrong that's actually what God has written in our hearts. That's what it is.
Yeah.
We're in the image of God. So when we do something to disobey him, we feel that. Yes, we can suppress it. But we know that what we're doing is wrong because it's not in the image of him. So when and it's sad because I live in a society, I live in a culture right now, and in my environment, I see a bunch of people that are walking around that are addicts, that are alcoholics. And, my brother's a recovering heroin addict, and he's been struggling with his whole life. And, the thing is this, I had a friend that just came over, he's getting ready to go into a halfway house. And he's like, Ezra, yeah, man, I'm doing really good. I've been clean for like 30 days. I said, hey man, that's great, man. That's good. And I was telling him, I said, what you really need to do, Paul, is really surrender yourself to God and let God mold you to what he wants you to be. I said, see, a lot of people will go into the mind state of being like, hey, I want to be the old Paul or whatever it is. You know what I mean? I want to be the old Kevin. I was like, you can't go back to what you used to be. I said, now you can go and move on to being something better. But see, it'll be something that to where you can glorify him out of what he's going to do through your life. It's all for the glorification of him and what he does. And that's what I had to do. I had to really just sit down here with him just an hour and a half and talk to him and just let him know I'm not beating the whole God thing into his face, you know what I mean? But at the same time, I'm letting him know about the grace of God and what it does. And I told him, I said, hey man, it doesn't matter if you was shooting a needle into your arm or if you're a womanizer, bro. I said, I was a womanizer. I was everything under the sun. You know what I mean? I said, it doesn't matter. I said, it's all sin to God. I said, what we're not doing what's pleasing him, man. You know what I mean? But, we got
issues with gluttony. I mean, we've got issues with all kinds of it.
Right, absolutely. And we just live in this society now where we have this generation of where parents lacked on their end, even though they may have grew up in the church. But then they're like, well, I'm not really going to press the issue on my kids. You know what I mean? And now we kind of see what happens from that, from the result of it.
Well, yeah.
But,
we're spoiled. I was just reading. I stay. A couple of my friends are missionaries, and I read a lot of the missionary journals. But the insurgents of the immigrants, the Syrian immigrants in Europe, they're actually filling up the churches that the British white populations have been leaving. Right. The immigrant, they get it. They know what starvation and hunger. We've got it made, and so we lose the dynamic of spirituality when you're not having to. But see, we depend on God every day. It's just we don't know it. But when you're broken, you know it.
Right. That's like
that creates that disparity there that we've just lost. And I thank God. In a paradoxical way, but I thank God that I came from a long line of alcoholics. My dad was sober when he passed away. I was sober, and we had that together, and that I'm able to talk to other people instead of God talk. I'm able to use God talk, but I'm able to talk about I understand what it means to wake up at 3 a.m. and have an incredible craving to just get out of it. And you do, and I said yeah, and. Yeah, let's talk about it. And I thank God for that, because God works all things to the good. That becomes I don't want to sugarcoat the harm that I did to my kids. They hated the fact that they looked up to me, but they hated me when I was drinking. And so I don't downplay. I'm not downplaying that in any way, shape, or form. To celebrate. Hey, I used to be it's I don't know, you might be able to think or hear some sense of what I'm saying. On one hand, I don't regret the past, but yet on the other hand, I don't shut the door to it. It's I don't regret it, but then on the other hand, there's still guilt. It's sin. This stuff destroys people.
Right. that's a great thing though. You can see the sanctification process being made through you, and then that's the thing is like my girlfriend's a recovering addict of heroin, and I had her come down and give a testimony to my friend Paul that's getting ready to go into a halfway house. I'm like, listen, man, I'm not an addict. You know what I mean? I don't really know what you're going through. I could tell you, hey, man, you need to stay in prayer and all this, and I'll be praying for you. But let me give you a testimony and show you where someone was at with it and where they're at now. You know what I mean? And I'm like, and I, and she's a believer, and I'm like, look, man, I'm telling you, man, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough, but there's nothing impossible with God, nothing at all. And it's just like, unfortunately, we live in a society where we try to do everything with the flesh and have nothing to do with God at all. You know what I mean? And right. You're an addict and that's it. You always have to deal with this, and there you go. You know what I mean? It's just like, come on, man. It's not. I don't think that's really giving much people hope. You know what I mean? I think the only hope we have is in Jesus Christ. If you ask me, but.
Well, I love the verse where it said, you mentioned that it's tough, and it is for a lot of people. He made atonement for the sins of the people because he himself suffered when he was tempted. For addicts, they feel it a lot when tempted. I know before what I, call my miracle happened, but I do remember where I would have those pulls and those temptations, and I'm a Christian. I know what it's going to happen if I say yes, and I would say yes, and Jesus resisted that because I knew. See, it's weakness. The flesh is weak. That's where I come back to identifying with a lot of the phrasing that I see in the New Testament, where I can, the good that I want to do, the evil is right there with me. It's like I want to do the good. I can't resist this. It's too good. Well, an addict can identify with that because of that struggle. Yeah, I mean, nobody, getting drunk and all that stuff, you don't do it. It's not like sticking an ice pick in your eye. It feels good. That's why we do it. We're getting something out of it that is not when we're sober. We're not, there's something that needs to take place. So it's an addict's life who's trying to quit is very difficult, but Jesus resisted. But my point is that Jesus resisted temptation, but there was suffering there. That is to resist temptation and say no to that which is ungodly. You're suffering with Christ there, because now you're imitating Christ and you're suffering with him, or he's suffering rather in you by the Spirit. And there's a point of identification there where Jesus is, no. And we're able to say, no. And when I watch these guys, and I'm sure you've seen them, that's in yourself, when you start putting some time behind you and you, by the grace of God, and you're really relying on God, and it's just easy to say no, whereas years ago it wasn't. And now you hang on to that, that sobriety I hang on. That's my, and then with Dad, but that I just hang on to that with everything I got. And I want everyone to experience that. I want them to know Jesus Christ, the power of his death and resurrection, because this is the life that I have now, even with my kids, that's been restored, and is just, I wouldn't trade it for anything. I'm going to start crying here in a minute, but I wouldn't trade this for nothing, because God, just did a work, at least as I interpret the scriptures and I apply them to my life. I'm able to, subjectively use that kind of existential, spiritual language, without sounding like, God, but maybe it is God. Thank God, maybe it's, is that, but, I wouldn't trade this for anything in the world. I want everyone to experience this, but it comes through the power of Jesus Christ and no other. These rehab places, I watch them come and go, man. I mean, they get in there and they get sober, and then they come right on out and they do it again.
Right.
And I tried to quit 50,000 times before, and my dad, it killed my dad. He was sober the last year of his life, but he died basically acute alcohol-related cirrhosis.
Right.
So he was as healthy as a horse. A guy who was extremely athletic and all these things, but he had a bad liver for 15 years, and he drank on top of a bad liver. And
that'll do it.
You get what you get.
Yeah. It's unfortunate, man. I mean, it really is, and I think people, what's funny is I read some of them AA and NA books that they and it's funny because they don't really use the term God. They'll say your higher power or whatever. The same ones that they say that out of, they're quoting Psalms, they're quoting John. They got all these Bible verses in here, and I just had to bring it to realization to some of these people, like, man, do you guys understand who this is referring to? You know what I mean? This is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is
no doubt about it.
This is the eternal God. Like, this is what we're in the image of it. And I have to really break it down to them like that. And like, look, let me show you this. And I'm like, this is the reason why you're able to connect to it. Just like what you said, when you see about the suffering, when you read in the New Testament and you see about the suffering and you see about just overcoming the flesh and stuff like that, why it connects to them, because they start to see that, hold on, man, this is actually, I'm dealing with the flesh, but there's a spiritual side to it too, where it's like, I'm trying to really cover up something that's happened to me, or something that has caused me so much anguish that I just have to cover it up on a daily basis. And when they realize, and it's like them scriptures, and I really believe this, they breathe life into you, and then and then the veils start to be lifted. And once the veils get lifted, it's like the journey really begins. You're like, oh man, the dots start to connect. And that's where I try to that's why I like talking to alcoholics and addicts and stuff like that, and let them know about how powerful these scriptures really are, and how they can really breathe life into you, and you know what I mean, and stuff like that. But yeah, I love talking about this stuff. Yeah.
Hey, a lot of read the writings. I mean, I got like Carl Jung. This is C.J. Jung, Carl Jung. He was a student with Freud, and he broke off from Freud, and then he started but early AA drew heavily off of Jung, and he's a very spiritual writer, and he was talking about that utter hopelessness, utter despair. You want to do something, but you can't. You need to stop, but you can't. You're hurting the ones that you love and that love you, but you can't. He said that place there is where God brings you. And every Christian should experience that whole deflation, that flesh profits nothing. Your life is nothing but a drop in the bucket, a sham. You're a fake, you're a fraud, you're evil, and you're phony. Now you meet Jesus.
Right.
Right, exactly. I don't think a lot of church people have heard that message. We've heard prosperity. We've heard how you're a new creation in Christ. You can do all things. Well, you can't be a new creation before you understand what you were before you were, and why you needed to be a new creation.
Right. A lot of people don't understand Soli Deo Gloria.
Yes. Yeah. And not hearing that message.
Right. And I think that, we do hear a watered down gospel today in a lot of churches, and I agree 100% is that I think the ones that God pulls up out of the trenches and really like, hey man, you're this close from losing your life. You know what I mean? Like, you're this close from just losing it all. And it's like, I'm not saying everybody's experience has to be like that. But when I see that, when I seen my cousin that was a full-blown heroin addict, he was a drug dealer, and now he is going to church every Sunday. He loves God, and he really understands it now. And he's just like, I can't believe this. Like, you know what I mean? He's been sober now for like 3 or 4 years. And it's great. It's like when you see that, it's like this is the least person, even growing up as a kid, you know, the least person you would expect to be a quote unquote church person. You get what I'm saying?
Oh,
and
yeah.
you're like, oh man, this guy right here, you know. And then, but
He's totally,
right, and you see him now, you're like, what happened? And then you know, I sit back and I realize, wow, man, that was the work of God, and you know, His Holy Spirit was really working through him, man, and really transformed him what he needs.
what else would it be?
What you guys are describing is Luke chapter 7, verse 47. It says, therefore I tell you, because her many sins have been forgiven, she has loved much, but he who has been forgiven little loves little.
Right, absolutely.
That verse, I love that verse, because what it is saying is that every Christian experience should understand how much they have been forgiven, regardless of whether or not they were child molesters or not, or drug addicts or not, or, you know, rapists or what, or murderers or anything. We're not all Charles Manson. We're not all, but that verse right there tells me that regardless, everyone should understand how much you've been forgiven. And that if you're not Charles Manson, you're not a child molester, you're not, that's by the grace of God. That's by the restraining hand of God on your life. That's not because you're so a good moral ace. You know, that's because of God. And that's the realization, my God, without you, the very people that I was judging, the rapists and the murderers and the drug dealers and the addicts and the prostitutes, I could be one of those. If it weren't for you, you know, and that realization really puts a zap on your head when you really see that, you know, you really like, but a lot of churchgoers, oh, I could never do anything. Oh, yes, you could. If it weren't for God, you could. You would. You would do it.
Absolutely.
Right. We're and that's why I tell people we're in a fallen state, and I believe that 100%. I believe that fallen state, we're fallen creatures, and you know, they made a good a comparison there. He's like, you know, you don't have to tell your kid not to stick his. You don't have to like, if you told your kid, hey man, don't stick your finger in that light socket or in that electrical outlet, you know, you got to tell him not to do it. You know what I mean? Because he'll look back at you and be like, let me see, because it's in our nature. It's automatically in your nature to want and go.
I got spanked. My dad, he's painting the garage, and I got spanked because I went out there. I was like 5 years old and went out in the garage, and Dad just beat the living, you know, what is wrong? And I had paint all over me. I'm just all over the wall. It's wet paint.
Right. Perfect example. You know what I mean? You have to tell the kid not to do it, you know?
Yeah.
It's just in our nature to want to be rebellious and defiant. Like it just is. It's just in our nature. And like,
so Ezra, now you've completely, you know, you've fully expressed the total depravity in tulips. Are you now coming over to Calvinism? Because you said,
I
you know what I mean?
5-point Calvinist.
Yeah, you sound like a Calvinist. I assumed you were a Calvinist.
Sounded like it tonight, but normally he resists us.
Well, I don't resent you.
That's good Calvinism, man. Yeah.
I was going back and forth between that and Arminianness, and like just kind of bouncing back between it, and so you know, me and my uncle was talking about free will, whatever, right? And I was like, he's like, well, did Jonah have free will? And I was like, what do you mean? He was like, well, he didn't have a choice if he was going to get swallowed by that fish, did he? I said, well, it's his actions, you know, him being defiant towards God that made him do that. You know what I mean? He was like, yeah, but God told him to go do something. He didn't want to go do it. You know what I mean? So, you know, I was like, well, maybe it's limited free will that we have, you know, but yeah.
What I finally convinced him, I think, is that free will is not sovereign will. So when I say that, you know, let's say that I have a bird in a cage, and you come up to me and you say, well, let's free that bird. And I say, what are you talking about? That bird is free. Technically, we're both right, because that bird can fly around the cage all it wants, but it's not free, totally free. So we are dead in our sins. And so I think a lot, you know, that's a good way of expressing total depravity.
Well, that is a good one. I give you that. That is kind of a good one. The one that I have is like the elect. The one that I really struggle with is the elect.
Yeah.
It's saying that, you know, because it's like you almost ask a Calvinist, like, well, how do you know that you're the elect? You know what I mean? And it's like, I don't know. It's just harder for me to wrap my head around where it's like, well, if you let's say, like for you, Sam, God forbid, let's say you did slip up and you accidentally had a drink or whatever, right? And it's like it's like using that analogy. It's like, well, was he ever really part of the sheep or wasn't he? You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know if I could really put a stamp on that and be like, oh, well, he was part of God's sheep, or he wasn't because he happened to slip up. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's a hard
you with that whole thing with elect. I mean, it's a hard election is seen from God's perspective. God knows those whom are His, and those are the elect. Do those whom God knows who are His, do they know that they are His? Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. You have assurance of faith. That now you got the more subjective element. So on one hand, you've got the objective. God knows those whom are His. Those are the true elect, whom He knows. Those are the elect. Do they whom He knows that they know Him? Well, Paul makes that, that I know God rather than I am known of God. He switches there. He's like, rather than I'm known of God. It's like he corrects himself almost. Now, how do I know that I'm known of God? Well, I test yourself to see if you're, in the, you have these, because we're still in this existential life here, and the subjective elements, then I have to make sure of my calling. Even though my calling from God's perspective is sure, there are things in my life where I have to, because I'm not God, so I can't.
Right.
You know what I mean? So now hope enters in. I hope.
Right.
But do I wake up every morning? I'm one of God's elect. I don't know. I make your calling an election. Sure. So there's that kind of tension, that's there. I said I've never doubted God or any of that. Were there times in my life where I thought that I was not one of God? Yes. Yeah. I didn't doubt God. Maybe I'm not saved because I couldn't be doing the things that I'm doing if I were saved.
Right. First John.
Have I had those doubts? Oh yeah, I've had those doubts.
It's great though, Sam. Like there are Calvinists, kind of, I guess you would call them hyper Calvinists. I don't know, like that kind of really do that. Like, well, hey man, it doesn't matter what.
Oh yeah.
Hey man, it doesn't matter if I go and get high. It was meant to be.
I've met them.
Like it's just
they're crazy. I've met these guys.
Right.
I would argue, go out and kill somebody. Well, if I go out and kill somebody, God calls me to. So, well, yeah, He did. But will you be held accountable to? Well, yeah, I'll be held accountable. I just won't be judged for it, which is true. King David, slept with Bathsheba and had her husband killed. Not a nice guy. I wouldn't want to hang around David. David and Jacob are two people I would not want to hang around.
We were going through Jacob one time.
Jacob would rip you off. I don't care what business deal you did with Jacob. He would rip you off. You get ripped off.
I think the Hebrew word Jacob and deceit were synonymous.
Yeah.
Behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom is no deceit. It's like, behold, here's Israel with no Jacob.
And if you're friends with David, could you imagine, drinking wine with him and you disagrees with his sword's coming off? He's like, I'm ready to kill you. David, like,
and then go sleep with your wife.
He's crazy. He wanted to slaughter. What was the story of Nabal?
Right.
He wants to slaughter the entire group of people. And Abigail comes out and says, don't, come on. Because he's ready to just kill them all. Like Metallica, kill them all. Kill them all. Kill them all. And so he was, these guys were crazy people. But they had God in their life. I love these stories. One preacher I always stuck in my head, he said, you read these stories, you're just looking at a mirror. You're just looking at yourself.
Right.
These are horrible people in the Bible, but yet God used them.
Right.
Like Abraham. I mean, if I did that, to my fiance and I said, hey, we're in a new town here. Why don't you go sleep with the mayor? And then that way I'll look good. So you go and sleep with that. That's what Abraham did. I'm like, who does this?
Someone disfellowship with me because I said exactly what you're saying. He disfellowship.
I mean,
Right.
that's the thing. I mean, this is the type of people that God used. I mean,
Yeah.
like if you just look and you're like, man, Yahweh really did this. Like he really used these people. Like, and sure enough, he did, man. He did. You're like,
My brother is an alcoholic. My brother's still continuing, but he's so, and he thinks he's gonna die. He's in his face. He's always like, yeah, I'm gonna die. Dad's died, so he's like, I'm gonna, whatever. So So, but before he dies, he wants to read the Bible through. So he bought this Holman's chronology Bible in a year. This is his bucket list. He wants to read the Bible through. So he's reading it, and we're talking. He's asking questions, the right questions, because he's reading it. But he finally gets to Lot.
oh man.
And he's like, and now he's using foul language there. He's like, what the heck? His daughters sleep with Lot. I said, yeah. He said, that's effed up. He goes, that's right. Not right. Dude, that's welcome to the Bible.
Well, yeah, this is the thing. Is like, look at where they were living. That's all they were exposed to. I mean, come on, man. Right, and that's what kills me. Is like, look what they're. It's a perfect example of being a product of your environment. I mean, it's a perfect example. It's like, come on, man. And not only, but they both conspire. Hey, we're gonna get dads.
Both of them. Both of them. Not one. I can understand one. I have two daughters, so I can understand both of them. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is not right. This is pornographic. This is horrible. Right. Well, I think it was Richard Pratt. He wrote a wonderful book called "He Gave Us Stories," and that was his point. He's like, it's meant to be offensive. It is meant to offend you.
Right.
I'm like, yeah, that's it. It's horrible what's happening here. And yet, God, there he is, working his purpose.
Right. God works with dirt and dust. So
right. I read these stories and I don't feel so bad. Well, I didn't sleep with someone and then have her husband killed because I got her pregnant.
Right.
Like David did. Got him drunk. And then he's so good, he sleeps outside my door because he's so loyal to me, but I still have him killed. I mean, this is bad.
Was that like a frontline man too? That was like one of his best soldiers that he had. Like he put him up.
It was the most loyal soldier that he had.
Out of all that,
he gets him drunk and says, "Go home, sleep with your wife." And Uriah sleeps out the front. He sleeps outside of his door because his army is at battle. The king's army is at battle, and he's too loyal to David to have any pleasures with his wife. And David kills him. Yeah. And then, it gets worse because Nathan comes to him and says, hey, there's a guy that stole some sheep from the guy who only had one sheep, and he took his one sheep. And David's like, well, that guy needs to die. And then Nathan says, you son of a, you're the guy.
Right.
So David is just completely, he's lost his salvation.
Right.
No, without.
Yeah, he gets reborn again. He gets rebaptized again. So.
Without that, we would never have Psalms 139 through 143.
Oh, yeah.
And I read those. I've just been placed in jail earlier this month for something ridiculous. But what I did to maintain my sanity is I read Psalms 139 through 143 every few hours, and it shows the omnipresent, omniscient, and omnipotent God, and that He's everywhere. He's everything within you. That is so Calvinistic within that 139 through 143. I couldn't believe, but because of David doing all those things, he understood God more because of that.
He understood the sinfulness, and I think through that he understood the grace. And R.C. Sproul really harps. He goes through understanding our own sinfulness and God exposing our sinfulness to us, and yet redeeming us. We understand so much His love. It's like Corrie ten Boom, who came out of the Holocaust. She said that no sin is so deep that His grace is not deeper still. And right. It just, because she forgave one of the Nazis. She years later ran across one of the Nazi guards, and she forgave them. And she said, at that moment, my life changed, and I realized that no sin is so deep that God's grace is not deeper. And I'm like, man, that's gosh. That is it.
I have a poem that I like to share with people, and it deals with mercy and grace. I'd love to share it. This is the poem that says,
You wrote this?
once upon a time in a village far, far away, beyond the night and past the day, the village of beauty and all that's within would shine, a village of beauty and all that's within would cause one to smile much more than to grin. There was a great king in the center of town, surrounded by light which came from his crown. Then one day the great king said with a smile on his face, a bride I desire, so I'll build her a place. A great mansion with many rooms I shall build. With treasures and gifts I will see that they're filled. And the great king did work with much skill to show forth his love and all his goodwill. For this king is special in all that he makes. He sees that it's good and has no mistakes. When the townsfolk had seen the gift that he made, they shouted for joy and began to parade. Oh, great king, thou hast done it again. For your great skill is matched by no man. And then the great king did say with a frown, alas, my true bride is in need of a gown. Diligently he began with needle and thread to sew a white garment to fulfill what he said. And when he had finished, the garment did shine. It was so bright, they thought it divine. Oh, great king, what shall we say? This new garment is brighter than day. And then the great king yet again said, behold, now for my bride, a harp of pure gold. And then the king worked with, great king did work with great skill to show, let's see. Sorry, I messed it up. And then the townsfolk shouted with great glee, oh, great king, it is fortunate to see each gift becomes greater. Whatever will the next one be? And then the great king said with a final decree, the greatest gift I have to give, I have yet to show ye. And then he did work, and work did he do. For this was the greatest gift that he knew. And when he had finished, he held out his hand to show them the nail prints, for these were his plans. The townsfolk stood silent, confused as if vexed, for they were much more than simply perplexed. What is this horrible thing that has befallen our great king? Another replied with sadness and woe, I don't understand, and I don't know. But the great king knew that they understood not, for this was a mystery that he hadn't yet taught. You will not understand this greatest gift yet, for my bride-to-be you have still not met. And then one day his young bride did appear, long awaited and cherished and showing great fear. And the great king stretched out his hands to embrace, while his bride did recognize both mercy and grace. She understood the greatest gift he could give was that he had his hands pierced so that she could live. She wondered and marveled at this work he had done. It had all been for her, for she was the one. Then the townsfolk understood what they saw, and all of the village stood there silenced in awe. Now, little children, the lesson is clear. 'Tis mercy and grace the great king holds dear.
That's what it's all about. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that's,
That's it, right?
His mercies are new every morning, brand new. You got a brand new day every day.
If you miss that, you miss the gospel.
Yeah. It's a lot of people give that lip service and, oh yeah, I know I don't deserve it. I know I don't, but I do think that, I'm an old charismatic. I mean, I don't practice any of that anymore, but there's still a part of me that, a lot of people, they say that, but they don't, there is to be something still subjective, existential, feeling what we would, the old term would be affections rather than emotions. I don't like that word emotions. Affections, right. Affections is good. There has to be something there, and a lot of people pay lip service. Well, I know that I don't deserve the gospel and everything, but I don't do. And it's like, man, I'm not doubting salvation but has it sunk through what God has done for? I mean, is it really? There's sometimes when I'm singing certain hymns or psalms where I'm starting to like ball up. It comes out of nowhere.
There's some hymns I can't sing.
I can't get through them.
Right. I can't either.
Yeah. And it's like, is there anything wrong with, a lot of people would frown on that and well, it's emotionalism. I said, well, Listen, are you reading the Psalms that I'm reading? Because David's crying every morning and night with tears in his bed. He's one psalm. He says, "I flooded my bed with tears. My bed is soaking wet. I've been crying so much."
Right.
I think we've lost some of that, too. But God knows what He's doing. When I read stuff that's going on in South Africa, the Christians exploding, Christianity is exploding. Not so much in the West. Seems to be on a little decline in the West right now, but over in the East, China, Syria, it's exploding from all accounts. I mean, it's growing. And maybe our better skin color complected brothers and sisters will teach us less skin complected people. Maybe they have something to teach us.
Absolutely.
So because you see worship service. I have a friend that's Nigerian. He said the worship service. He goes, "You watch these guys get together, man. They're just so happy. And it's all joyous and it's contagious. And you can't." He goes, "I'm not a dancer or anything, but it's so contagious you just can't." I'm like, "Man, that's crazy." Because it is. That's man.
In the book of Second Church, which was the Church of Smyrna, that's how they were. That's how they were over. They were so persecuted.
Yeah. And I've seen, the charismatic movement. I went through it in a kind of a heyday, late 70s, 80s. I've seen some really crazy running up and down I've seen some crazy stuff.
Boy. That's the type of church I came from, man. Old Pentecostal movement.
Pentecostal sweat. Sweat's just running down your face.
It'd be like, 70-year-old man jumping up and down. I'm not gonna lie, it used to freak me out as a kid. Like, what in the world?
Oh, it freaked me out.
Right. I'm like, what is, and I tell people, like, listen, man, if you got a freak coming into Christianity, you may not want to take it to a Pentecostal church because it's overwhelming, man. It was for me as a kid, like, even the speaking in tongues thing, I was like, oh man, what is going on here? Like,
out in public, you're gonna get locked up.
Right. Right. And man, it was, but see, this is the problem that I kind of had with it growing up as a kid. Like, I was always waiting to hear the sermon. It was like, man, we got 2.5 hours of singing here, like, and there's only 30 minutes of preaching. Like, come on, man. Like, I was trying to find a balance there. It was kind of hard to find that as a kid because it was a lot of, charismatic just jumping and it was,
See, from there I went. Again, because of who I was reading and Professor Robinson, it was from there. There's a book by Stephen Chaucer called The Canterbury Trail, and it talked about this. In the 90s there was the liturgical movement that was going on, even in the Reformed. They were, with the vestments and all that. And they were James Jordan was doing this. You have Ray Sutton, who's part of the Anglican Episcopal Church, and then you have the Reformed Episcopal Church, Reformed Anglicans. You have these and from charismatic, which is almost anti-liturgical, to liturgical. So I went over to the other side. So now I'm like, can't you fuse the liturgical with the spiritual? Can you bring those two things? And now there's like charismatic Catholics, there's charismatic Anglicans. I haven't seen those guys yet, but
as a kid, I went to a Catholic school like 2 or 3 years, and they just did it for educational purposes, anyways. But which I aced religion class, by the way. Like, I was like the only kid in class that really knew the Bible. But anyways, it was weird going to one of the, because you would have to go to a mass or whatever. So and it was like real. It was like, they had like their hymns that they would sing was real, like, chanting almost. But besides that, like, you could barely clap. Like, I was used to like, hey, amen, hallelujah. And then like in a Catholic church, like, don't even say nothing. Like, you couldn't even whisper to your next door neighbor, like, hey man, what's going on? It was just a big change seeing that, man. Growing up in a Pentecostal church, and then on Wednesdays at school, I would have to go to a Catholic mass and be like, "Oh man, what's going on?" Like it was just. But there's
reverence there. There's that reverence, and I love the silence and the reverence. There's something to be said. There's a silence in heaven for half an hour. It says in Revelation there was silence. Be still and know that I'm the Lord. There's that kind of a thing. It was explained to me a long time ago, the church of many colors, and they saw that as a type of the church. Church is like a diamond, and there's a lot of different colors, and some of us like the liturgy, and some of us like red, and some of us like blue, and God's got a little bit of, if you don't like this group, then you can go over here and join this group. They're all the same, and that allowed me to become a little more ecumenical, so that I wasn't, you got to worship this way. Well, worship the way that is in your heart,
right?
Which is what worship is anyway. It's of the heart and spirit. Didn't Jesus say worship is of the true fathers will worship? So worship in Nigeria does not look like worship in South Bama, Mobile, Alabama.
Right.
If nature is so diverse and God created nature, then He loves diversity.
Right. And
so very ecumenical about that as far as
good. Well, we agree. I got to get out of here. It's almost 12 o'clock, but it's amazing how much we agree upon when we started this topic on what we didn't agree on.
And you're agreeing with full preterist on a lot of things. So I really do appreciate you spending your time with us. I mean,
what are your? Well, just keep sending me email. My work is I'm all over the place, so I never know my hours from week to week.
We do this on Monday and Wednesday, Friday night, about 8:30. 9, but I mean we go till sometimes 2, 3 in the morning Eastern time. So
no, brother. Sometimes it's lasted till 6:30 in the morning.
That's true.
All right.
So you're always welcome. I'll send you the link, and whenever you feel like it, no pressure. Just we'd love to have you.
Okay. Can I invite other people here?
Absolutely.
I mean, do you have a name to this thing? Is it Hangouts? Google is.
Yeah, basically Google Hangout, and it just goes straight to YouTube. And just like William Bell and Don Preston, those guys do.
This is recorded?
Yeah, that's what it does. I mean, it's on Google Hangout, but Google Hangout it goes through. It's with YouTube. They're all linked together. So
Google Hangs.
Right when we push stop broadcast, it goes straight to my YouTube channel.
Icon, my Mary icon here or there.
His YouTube channel is Commandment Keeper, so he's Commandment Keeper on there. So because he had that because he used to be Hebrew roots. So.
Yeah, he's the one who invited him. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So Wednesday, I'll send you the link, and we usually get together. It's anywhere from like 6 to 10 of us, and.
So what? So Wednesday. So this Wednesday, this coming Wednesday.
Yeah. We are. Podge, we have some Unitarians come on actually, and we had to defend the deity of Christ.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Wild. I mean that, and then we've got futurists, we've got partial preterists, and actually the majority of us are preterists now. And so we've got a smudge podge of different things, but we all get together and we can all relate, and that's the good part that we see.
Yeah.
Well, how many people can join in the room?
I think like 10, ain't it? 10.
There's 10 people can join in the room, but as many people as possible can watch. So
then you could set up like a debate kind of thing on this.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to shoot for here. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We're just trying to figure out the kinks.
Get Don Preston on here.
We'll have to. Yeah. Next, we'll have to get you.
I'll get a big cigar going here. We'll just.
Wait. What question have? I was watching a YouTube channel where Don Preston was saying that you backed out of the debate, but yet I knew that was really one side of the story. So I knew that there was probably something overwhelming where you decided not to participate in the debate. But could you just give us real quick your side of the story, if you don't mind?
Yeah, nasty divorce, drunkenness, and alcoholism.
Okay, all right. So it wasn't.
That's a good excuse.
That's it in a nutshell. That's the short version of it.
Yeah.
Okay, so what? Right.
You know, I don't want to. If this is going to be on YouTube, so I can't share anything that would affect everything's
Well, hold on
fine.
real quick. Let's
This was years ago, but